The doctor was operating on a patient, his cell phone ringing incessantly. Minutes later, he was horrified as the hospital director entered the operating room abruptly. The air in the OR at San Vicente de la Salud Hospital was thick with tension. A torrential downpour raged outside as Dr. Romero, a renowned 50-year-old cardiac surgeon, prepared for one of the most important surgeries of his career. His steady hands adjusted his surgical mask, his eyes scanning the room, checking every detail. His team moved with silent efficiency, preparing instruments and monitoring the patient's vital signs. Dr. Romero took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. This isn't just another surgery, he thought. This is Mrs. Isabel's chance at a new life. She confided in me. She saved every penny for her dream, and instead she had to use it for this surgery, for a chance to live. We can't make any mistakes. I need your best, as always, he told his team, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Holding the scalpel with confidence, Dr. Romero made the first incision. The silence was broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. Steady hands, Romero. Remember why you became a doctor, he murmured to himself, concentrating intensely on each movement. Dr. Romero, vitals are stable. Blood pressure is within the expected range, the head nurse reported. Without looking up from his work, he replied, "Thank you. Let's keep it that way. Let's give this patient the chance at life she deserves. Every beat of this heart is precious, and we'll fight for each one." As the surgery progressed, Dr. Romero felt the tension rise. Mrs. Isabel's heart, now exposed, beat steadily under his skilled hands. "Look at that, still strong after all these years. You're a fighter, aren't you, Mrs. Isabel?" he thought, admiring his patient's resilience. But as if on cue, a monitor blared an alarm. The heart was showing signs of distress. No, not now. Come on, Mrs. Isabel. Stay with me," Dr. Romero muttered, his hands moving with redoubled precision. "Nurse, I need more suction here. Someone adjust the perfusion. We need to keep the blood flow stable," he ordered, his voice calm, masking the urgency of the moment. "You haven't come this far to give up now, Mrs. Isabel. Think of your grandchildren, the hugs you'll give, the stories you'll tell. We're in this together," he continued, as if he could will his determination directly into his patient's heart. The minutes stretched on, each one an eternity. Sweat beaded on Dr. Romero's forehead, but he barely noticed. "Focus, Romero. Every stitch, every movement, it all has to be perfect. She trusted you. Don't let her down," he repeated to himself like a mantra. The tense silence of the operating room was shattered by the insistent ringing of a cell phone. Dr. Romero, still focused on the delicate task of stabilizing Mrs. Isabel's heart, barely registered the sound at first. But Laura, the head nurse, exchanged a worried glance with him before moving to answer the call. As Laura listened to the voice on the other end, her face paled visibly. Her eyes widened, and she cast a look of pure astonishment at Dr. Romero. "Dr. Romero, it's about your son Ivan. They're bringing him to the emergency room right now. There was a car accident." Her voice shook. The doctor felt his own heart skip a beat. "Ivan? God, no. Not now. Not when I'm in the middle of this crucial surgery. Please tell me it's not serious," he thought, struggling to maintain his composure. Laura continued, her voice low and urgent. "Ivan sustained severe chest trauma. Preliminary examinations by the paramedics indicate he needs emergency cardiac surgery. You're the only cardiac surgeon at the hospital right now." Her words hit Dr. Romero like a punch in the gut. His hands, so steady moments ago, trembled visibly over Mrs. Isabel's open chest. A whirlwind of emotions swept over him. Fear, desperation, guilt. "No, this can't be happening. My son needs me. But Mrs. Isabel, she entrusted her life to me. How can I make this decision?" he thought, his world crumbling around him. The team in the room watched in tense silence, aware of the impossible dilemma their leader faced. Dr. Romero closed his eyes briefly, taking a deep breath to steady his swirling mind. "Laura, who else is available? Who can attend to Ivan while I finish here?" he asked, his voice shaky but determined. Laura hesitated before answering. "The medical director is available. He has experience as a general practitioner, but his main specialty isn't cardiology, and this choice, it could be fatal for your son." Dr. Romero felt the full weight of the decision crushing him. Every second that ticked by was crucial, both for Mrs. Isabel and Yvonne. My son needs me, and I'm here, hands literally inside another person's chest, he thought, the internal conflict tearing him apart. With a supreme effort, he forced himself to make a decision. Laura, he said, tell the director to prepare Ivan for surgery immediately. Tell him to start the procedure. I'll finish here as quickly as possible, and then I'll go help him. His voice cracked on the last phrase. The tension in the room was palpable as Laura hurried away to relay the instructions. The doctor turned his attention back to Mrs. Isabel, his movements now charged with a desperate urgency. Mrs. Isabel, he murmured, I promised to do my best for you, and I will keep that promise. But now I need you to fight with me. We need to finish this quickly because another life is at stake, the life of my son. He spoke as if the unconscious patient could hear and understand him. Every stitch, every movement was executed with almost supernatural precision, as if Dr. Romero were channeling all his anguish and fear into absolute focus. Time seemed to crawl and fly simultaneously, each minute precious for both lives in his hands. Laura returned to the room, her face a mask of professional concern. Dr. Romero, Dr. Jaime is preparing Ivan for surgery now. He said he'll do everything possible to stabilize him until you can get there. Her voice was soft yet urgent. The doctor nodded silently, grateful for his team's efficiency and his colleagues' willingness to take on such a monumental challenge. Thank you, Laura. Please keep me updated on Ivan's status. Now let's finish this here. Mrs. Isabel deserves our full attention at this moment, and that's what she'll get. His voice was filled with determination, though internally he waged a fierce battle against fear and guilt. Ivan, stay strong. Papa's doing everything he can to reach you. Fight, my boy, fight with all your might, he thought, wishing he could convey those words directly to his son's heart. With renewed resolve, the doctor continued the surgery, each movement a silent prayer for two precious lives in peril, knowing that the true test of his skill and courage was yet to come. Dr. Romero continued battling to stabilize the patient's heart. However, her condition remained precarious. The tension in the OR reached its peak when the door burst open, revealing the imposing figure of Dr. Jaime, the hospital director. His usually composed face was etched with lines of worry as he crossed the room, completely disregarding protocol. Dr. Romero, still bent over Mrs. Isabel's open chest, looked up, a wave of dread washing over him as he saw the expression on his superior's face. Jaime approached the operating table, his eyes fixed on Romero. Romero, I'm so sorry, but the situation is critical. Ivan, the tests showed severe heart damage. He needs surgery immediately. He left the sentence unfinished, the weight of the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Dr. Romero felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. Immediately, can't you stabilize him a little longer? What's his status? There must be other cardiac surgeons available, he stammered, his mind struggling to process the information. Jaime shook his head, the gravity of the situation evident in every word. The impact from the accident, it caused a rupture in the heart wall. As for other surgeons, you're the only one with the experience necessary for this specific type of procedure. Romero, I know this is asking the impossible, but Romero felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. His mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. Jaime, if I abandon this surgery now, the patient won't make it. How can you ask me to make this choice? And it's my son, but this woman also trusted me. She spent her life savings fighting for this chance to live. And now, Ivan. God, what do I do? He thought, the internal conflict threatening to consume him. Jaime, sensing Romero's struggle, placed a hand on his shoulder. Romero, I know this is an impossible decision, but we need to act quickly. You must decide, and you know what you have to do. You took an oath. You can't abandon this surgery, but I will leave the decision up to you. His voice was a blend of compassion and urgency. Dr. Romero closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady his churning mind. But before he could respond, the piercing sound of a monitor shrieked, beeping frantically. Mrs. Isabel's heart had gone into fibrillation. No, not now, Romero exclaimed, his hands moving instantly to intervene. Defibrillator! Now! He shouted, urgency in his voice. The doctor's order electrified the team into action. As they prepped the defibrillator, Romero performed manual chest compressions, his eyes glued to the monitors. "Come on, Mrs. Isabel. Don't give up now. You've come so far. Fight with me," he murmured, each compression a silent plea. The seconds stretched into hours as Romero struggled to stabilize her. His mind was torn between the patient in front of him and his son, whose life hung precariously in the balance just a few rooms away. Sweat mixed with unfallen tears of frustration and fear streamed down his face. "Clear," he commanded, delivering the shock. Mrs. Isabel's body arched on the table, but the monitor continued to show an erratic rhythm. Again! After the second shock, a weak but steady beep finally filled the room. A collective sigh of relief swept through the team, but the tension still hung heavy in the air. Dr. Romero, sweat dripping from his brow, kept his eyes glued to the monitors, afraid that any distraction could lead to another crisis. He barely had time to process the relief before he realized Mrs. Isabel's situation was far from stable. The heart in his hands, still exposed and vulnerable, started to spasm erratically. "Damn it! We're losing her again," he exclaimed, his skilled fingers moving rapidly to massage the organ directly. "We need more epinephrine now." As the team moved frantically around him, Romero felt the weight of two lives in his hands, literally. Mrs. Isabel's heart beat feebly against his fingers, each beat a struggle for survival. "Come on, ma'am. Don't give up now," he murmured, his voice a mixture of pleading and command. His eyes darted between the heart monitor and his patient's pallid face. At that critical moment, Dr. Jaime approached the operating table, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Romero, I still need your decision. Ivan is getting worse. If you don't attend to him now, he didn't need to finish the sentence. His low, urgent tone spoke volumes. With Mrs. Isabel's heart still beating erratically in his hand, Romero looked at Jaime, the conflict evident in his eyes. I can't just let go of her heart. If I do that now, she'll die instantly." His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "But Ivan, my son, he needs me too." Jaime nodded gravely, understanding the impossible dilemma. "There's only one way, Romero. I'll have to take over from here. You need to pass me her heart, literally, and attend to Ivan." Romero's eyes widened at the suggestion. The maneuver Jaime was proposing was incredibly risky. One wrong move, a fraction of a second's mistiming, and Mrs. Isabel wouldn't stand a chance. "Jaime, are you sure? This is almost impossible," Romero said, his voice barely a whisper. Jaime positioned himself beside him, his hands already gloved and ready. "We have no other choice, Romero. It's the only chance to save them both." With a tense nod, Romero began preparing for the most crucial handover of his career. "Listen carefully," Jaime instructed, his voice now firm and focused. "When I say now, you'll slide your hands out, exactly where mine are. There can't be even a millimeter of error. Understood?" Romero nodded, the concentration evident in every line of his face. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the two doctors positioned themselves. Romero could feel each weak beat of Mrs. Isabel's heart against his fingers, a constant reminder of the stakes. "Ready?" Romero asked, his eyes locked on Jaime's. With a final nod of confirmation, Jaime began the countdown. 3, 2, 1, now! In one fluid, precise movement, Romero's hands slid out as Jaime's took their place. For a terrifying moment, the heart monitor emitted an alarming sound, but it soon returned to a weak but steady rhythm. Jaime, his hands now inside Mrs. Isabel's open chest, looked at Romero, fierce determination in his eyes. "We need to do something unprecedented. Nurses, bring Ivan here, to this room, now." "Romero, this goes against every protocol," Jaime exclaimed, eyes wide with surprise. "To hell with protocol," Romero retorted, his voice firm and unwavering. "It's the only way to save them both." As Jaime rushed out to arrange Ivan's transfer, Romero turned his attention to the team. "Prepare the other side of the room. We need 2 complete sets of surgical equipment. Move," he commanded. The room erupted in a controlled frenzy of activity. Minutes that felt like hours later, The door swung open again, and Yvonne was rushed in, already anesthetized and prepped for surgery. "All right, Jaime," Romero said, his eyes darting between the two patients. "Now you're going to have to be my hands for Mrs. Isabel." "Are you sure? But I'm not a cardiac surgeon," Jaime protested, the fear evident in his voice. Romero began working on Yvonne's heart, his hands moving with millimeter precision, while simultaneously dictating instructions to Jaime. "I know, Jaime. Just listen carefully. You're going to feel her heart like it's a soft fruit. Any excessive pressure could cause a fatal rupture," he explained, his eyes locked on the director's hands. Jaime swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he positioned himself. "What if I make a mistake? I can't. Romero, I don't think this was a good idea. If this woman doesn't make it..." The director's voice wavered with fear. "Don't think about that. Trust me and trust your ability to follow instructions. You're an excellent doctor. You simply don't have this specialization, but I know you're capable." "I've seen you do things more difficult than this," Romero replied, not taking his eyes off Yvonne's heart. He guided Jaime through each movement, his voice calm but intense. "Now move your index finger 1 millimeter to the left. Do you feel that tiny bulge? It's crucial that you don't press on it. The slightest touch could trigger a fatal arrhythmia." "My God, Romero, how do you do this?" Jaime murmured, sweat beading on his forehead. "Years of practice and a lot of coffee. You'll get there too. Who knows, maybe someday we'll look back at this and laugh. How about the day we did the crazy thing and saved 2 patients, one being my own son?" Romero said, a strained smile on his lips. Suddenly, Yvonne's monitor shrieked in alarm. Romero felt his heart drop. "Damn it! We're losing him! Jaime, hold your position. Don't move a millimeter." Without hesitation, Romero began cardiac resuscitation on Yvonne, his movements precise and controlled. "Come on, son, fight," he murmured, each compression a silent plea. "Romero, what should I do?" Jaime asked, his voice shaking with tension. "Stay exactly where you are. If you move now, we'll lose Mrs. Isabel too," Romero answered, his voice surprisingly calm. The seconds stretched on as Romero fought for his son's life, his hands moving with superhuman speed and precision, alternating between resuscitation and microsurgical adjustments. "The pulse is returning. He's pulling through. Keep going, doctor," a nurse exclaimed, the relief evident in her voice. "All right, Jaime, now comes the delicate part. We need to close Mrs. Isabel's incision," Romero said, his focus split between the 2 patients. He guided Jaime through the suturing process, describing each movement with painstaking accuracy. "Every stitch needs to be exactly 3 millimeters apart. 1 millimeter more or less could cause serious post-operative complications." His emotions were raw, still shaken from the near loss of his son. As they worked, the storm outside the hospital reached its peak, with deafening thunderclaps that rattled the operating room windows. The lights flickered ominously, making everyone in the room hold their breath. For a moment, Romero, his hand still inside Yvonne's open chest, glanced worriedly at the monitors displaying both patients' vitals. The constant drumming of torrential rain on the roof added to the tense atmosphere. "This isn't good," Romero muttered, his gaze darting between Yvonne and Mrs. Isabel. "Jaime, how's the progress with the mitral valve?" Jaime, his hands shaking, answered, I don't know if I can, Romero. My hands won't stop shaking." At that moment, the lights flickered again, this time for a longer period. The hum of emergency generators echoed through the hallways, signaling the hospital was now relying on backup power. Romero felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead, aware that time was running out. They only had a few hours until the generators failed completely. "Damn it, Jaime, we need to speed up. We don't have much time. How long do the generators last?" Jaime glanced at the wall clock, his face pale in the dim emergency lighting. "The main generators have fuel for a maximum of 6 hours, Romero. The backup ones can give us maybe 3 more, if we're lucky." Romero cursed under his breath, his hands still working meticulously on Yvonne's heart. 9 hours, best case scenario. This double surgery could take at least 10. Jaime, we need a miracle here. At that moment, the operating room door flew open. A clearly agitated head nurse burst into the room. "Dr. Jaime, we have an emergency. The intensive care unit is panicking. If we don't start evacuating now, we could lose dozens of patients when the power goes out, she reported, her eyes frantic. Jaime looked at Romero, the conflict evident in his eyes. Romero, how will we do this surgery if I have to be somewhere else right now? If I leave now, she'll die. But if I stay, the other patients could die. Dozens of them. They depend on the machines in this hospital, Jaime said, a note of panic in his voice. Then we're going to have to be faster than we've ever been. We're going to have to be faster than we've ever been, Romero finished, his voice tense but resolute. He glanced at the clock on the wall. I can't be in two places at once. I have a responsibility to every patient in this hospital. This is when they need a good director. Nurse, give me the patient status in the ICU, Jaime ordered with a determined tone. The head nurse cut in, her voice urgent. We have 47 patients on life support. Without an evacuation plan, they have less than 20 minutes when the generators fail. Romero closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the decision almost unbearable. When he opened them again, a fierce determination burned in his gaze. Jaime, you can stay. We need to try and finish these surgeries as quickly as possible. Let's do it together, and fast, so you can get back to your duties. He stared intently at the director. Nurse, I need you to coordinate the evacuation. Follow the emergency protocol and keep us informed. Jaime was determined to save everyone. The nurse nodded briskly and hurried out of the room, leaving the two doctors to their seemingly impossible task. All right, Jaime, listen closely. We're going to do this step by step. Every movement counts. Every second is precious. Forget you're an administrator. Today you're a heart surgeon, and you have limited time to save your patient's life. Romero's voice was firm. Jaime took a deep breath, trying to steady his trembling hands. Okay, I'm listening, Romero. Guide me. Tell me exactly what to do to save this woman. Romero began to give rapid, precise instructions, his eyes flitting between Yvonne and Mrs. Isabel. Now move the forceps 2 millimeters to the left. Careful of the coronary artery. It's right there. Like that? Yes, like that, Jaime confirmed, his voice wavering slightly as he followed the instructions. Exactly. Now get ready to suture. Remember, every stitch has to be perfect. We don't have time for do-overs. Romero's own hands moved with impressive speed and accuracy on Yvonne's heart. The following hours were a frantic race against time. Romero alternated between operating on Yvonne and giving Jaime meticulous instructions. Every word was calculated, every movement precise. Sweat poured down their faces, the tension palpable. How are we doing for time? Romero asked without looking up from his work. Jaime checked the clock, his face a mask of concentration and concern. It's been 3.5 hours. We're halfway through the time we have with the generators. Damn it, we need to speed up, Jaime. Get ready for the next step. It's going to be the most delicate one yet. As Romero guided Jaime through a particularly complex maneuver, the storm outside seemed to intensify, as if challenging their resolve. The lights flickered again, making both doctors hold their breath. This can't be happening. This storm. It has to end, Jaime whispered, his hands frozen in place. Keep your focus, Jaime. Ignore everything around you. There's only you, me, and these two hearts that need us, Romero instructed firmly. The hours continued to tick by, each minute a battle against time and the limits of their own skill and endurance. Romero worked tirelessly, his hands moving with almost supernatural precision between the two patients. Romero, do you think we'll make it? Jaime asked, his voice hoarse with fatigue. Romero paused, glancing at the monitors displaying both patients' vitals. Despite the obvious exhaustion on his face, his eyes held a spark of determination. We have to make it, Jaime. It's not just about Yvonne and Mrs. Isabel anymore. It's about every patient in this hospital. Every stitch, every movement, brings us closer to saving not just 2, but dozens of lives. Then yes, we'll make it, because we don't have another choice. His voice was thick with emotion and resolve. With those words, both doctors returned to work with renewed determination, their hands dancing over open hearts, battling against the relentless clock and the raging storm outside. Suddenly, a deafening roar of thunder was the only warning before darkness consumed the operating room. For one terrifying instant, Romero's world was reduced to shadows and the sound of his own ragged breathing. His fingers, which seconds ago had been moving with millimeter precision, were now frozen in midair, still clutching the scalpel. God, I can't see anything. Did I cut something when the lights went out? He thought, panic seizing him. The oppressive silence was shattered by the shrill beeping of the heart monitors, signaling something was terribly wrong. Light! We need the emergency lights! Now! Romero shouted, his voice thick with panic. My God, Romero! What happened? Jaime's shaky voice came from the darkness. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, bathing the room in an eerie red glow, Romero felt his heart plummet. An alarming amount of blood was pooling rapidly around Yvonne's exposed heart, revealing the catastrophic mistake the blackout had caused. No! 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 My son! My son! He murmured, his hands moving frantically to try and contain the damage. Suction! I need to see where all this blood is coming from. A nurse quickly sprang into action, her voice tense. Doctor, blood pressure is dropping rapidly. He's losing a lot of blood. Romero barely heard her, his entire focus on the hemorrhage that threatened to steal his son's life. His fingers danced over Ivan's heart, desperately trying to locate and stop the source of the bleeding. Every second seemed to stretch into an eternity, the erratic beeping of the heart monitor a constant reminder of how close they were to losing everything. Come on, Ivan, hold on, please, my son. I can't bear it if you go by my own hands, Romero whispered, his hands never stopping. I'm not going to lose you, not like this. Jaime, still working on Mrs. Isabel. What can I do? He asked anxiously. Just keep Mrs. Isabel stable, Romero answered without looking up. And someone prep a blood transfusion for my son, immediately. He's losing too much blood. His blood type is O negative. He spoke knowing he had only minutes before the blood loss became fatal. With swift, precise movements, he began suturing the damaged vessels, his hands moving with a speed that defied comprehension. More light here, he commanded, and immediately a nurse directed a flashlight toward the surgical field. I need to see every vessel, every drop of blood, doctor. Hemoglobin levels are critical, the nurse reported, her voice wavering. Romero felt a bead of sweat roll down his forehead, but he didn't dare take his hands away from his work to wipe it. Every suture was a battle against time, every nod an act of defiance against the death that threatened to claim his son. Not today. I'm not letting you go, Ivan. Not while there's something I can do, Romero muttered through gritted teeth. Suddenly, another nurse rushed into the room, her face pale with worry. Dr. Romero, we have a problem, she said, her voice urgent. Ivan, O negative. We don't have any of that blood type available in the hospital. The storm caused several accidents, and the entire stock of blood bags was used, she explained, casting a distressed glance at the doctor. Romero felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. He looked at his hands, still working frantically to contain the bleeding, then at the monitor showing Ivan's fading vital signs. No, this can't be happening, he murmured, his mind racing for a solution. We need that blood. He won't survive without it. The nurse beside him spoke, her voice trembling. Doctor, what do we do? Romero stared at his son's pallid face, the blood still flowing despite his best efforts. The realization of what was happening, of what he might lose, hit him like a punch to the gut. He was losing his son, and for the first time in his career, he didn't know what to do. Ivan, please, hold on. I'll find a way. I have to find a way, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But even as the words left his lips, Romero knew he was facing an almost impossible battle. Time was running out, the blood kept flowing, and his son's life was slipping away, literally through his fingers. Time seemed to freeze as Romero stared at the monitor displaying Ivan's dwindling vital signs. His mind raced, desperately seeking a solution to the lack of O-negative blood. Suddenly, his eyes widened with a sudden realization. I'm O-negative. Prep for a direct transfusion. We're going to use my blood. His voice was barely audible over the frantic beeping of the monitors. Without hesitation, he turned to the team, his voice gaining strength. The head nurse stared at him, stunned. Dr. Romero, that's extremely risky. You can't operate and donate blood at the same time. We don't have a choice. It's Ivan's only chance. I get tested regularly. I know I'm a viable donor. Jaime, you're almost finished. You'll have to take over Mrs. Isabel's surgery. Completely. You can do this. Romero was already pulling off his surgical gown. Jaime, his hand still inside Mrs. Isabel's open chest, nodded nervously. I'll do my best, Romero. But Yvonne, how are you going to donate your blood and operate at the same time? Romero was already rolling up his sleeve, exposing his arm for the transfusion needle. I'll make it work. I'll operate with one hand and donate with the other if I have to. He looked at the team, his eyes burning with fierce determination. We don't have time to waste. Every second counts. We're going to save my son. Nurse, have them bring more blood from the nearest bank. Tell them to come quickly. The nurse nodded before running back into the hospital corridors, her efficiency born of desperation. The team swiftly prepped for the direct transfusion. Romero felt the prick of the needle in his arm, watching as his blood flowed through the tube into Ivan's pallid body. Without wasting a second, he turned his attention back to his son's exposed heart, his hands moving with almost supernatural precision. Come on, Ivan, fight with me. Use my blood. Use my strength. I won't let you go, he murmured, his fingers dancing over the damaged tissue. A nurse anxiously monitored the screens. Dr. Romero, Ivan's vitals are starting to stabilize, but yours are dropping rapidly. Romero ignored the warning, his focus solely on the delicate task of repairing the damage his mistake had caused. He could feel the strength draining from his body as his blood flowed into Ivan, but he refused to stop. Each stitch was a battle against his own growing weakness, each movement a struggle against the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. No matter what happens to me, continue the transfusion until Ivan is out of danger, he ordered through gritted teeth, his hands never stilling. Jaime, working furiously to finish Mrs. Isabel's surgery, cast a worried look at Romero. You need to take care of yourself too, Romero. We can't lose both of you. The minutes dragged by, each second an eternity of intense concentration and iron will. Romero could feel his vision starting to blur, his body trembling with the effort of remaining upright, but he refused to yield. His mind was focused solely on saving his son. More suction here. I need to see what I'm doing, he commanded, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. A nurse leaned closer, concern evident in her voice. Doctor, you're very pale. Maybe we should stop the transfusion for a moment, she suggested worriedly. No, don't stop until I say so. Ivan needs every drop. The priority is to save him. Do you understand? I want my son to walk out of this room alive, Romero exclaimed, louder than he intended. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision. The world around him seemed to spin, but he forced himself to concentrate on Ivan's heart, which was now beating stronger under his touch. Meanwhile, Jaime was finishing the last sutures on Mrs. Isabel's surgery, thanks to Dr. Romero's instructions. I'm almost done here. And you, how is Ivan? The director asked, his voice tense but relieved. Romero could barely respond, his tongue feeling thick in his mouth. He's improving, but I'm not done yet. Jaime quickly closed Mrs. Isabel's incision and moved to assist Romero. Let me continue, Romero. You've done enough. But Romero shook his head stubbornly, his movements now slow and clumsy. No, I need to finish this surgery. It's more complicated because of the incision. I have to fix what I did. I need to make sure. His voice was little more than a whisper, his eyes struggling to stay focused on the work in front of him. Dr. Romero, you need to stop the transfusion immediately. Ivan's vitals are normal now. But you must stop now or, the nurse warned urgently. Romero cut her off with a weak gesture. It doesn't matter. Just a few more stitches, he argued, pushing himself beyond his limits. He forced his shaking hands to make the final sutures. Every movement was agony, every second a battle against the encroaching darkness that threatened to claim him. The pain from the blood loss was starting to pierce his chest, but he refused to stop, refused to fail when he was so close. It's done. Ivan is safe, Romero finally murmured, the words almost inaudible. He withdrew his hands from his son, struggling to stay on his feet. Jaime quickly moved to support him as he swayed precariously. Romero, you did it. Now let us take care of you. But Romero barely heard him. With Ivan's heart beating strong and steady, he finally allowed the pain to engulf him. His legs buckled and he collapsed unconscious into Jaime's arms. The next day, Ivan blinked slowly, his eyes adjusting to the soft light of the hospital room. He felt disoriented, confused memories of the accident and surgery swirling in his mind. As his vision cleared, he saw Dr. Jaime standing by his bedside, a look of concern and relief on his tired face. "Welcome back, Ivan. How are you feeling?" Jaime said softly. Ivan tried to speak, but his throat was parched. Jaime offered him a glass of water, which he drank greedily. "How did I get here? I only remember the storm. I was driving and the tires skidded on the wet road. I don't remember anything after that. What happened?" Ivan finally managed to ask. Jaime took a deep breath, his eyes welling up. "Ivan, you were in an accident. The city was in chaos after the storm. Your father was the only one who could operate on you, and he did something incredible for you." And then, his voice catching, he told Ivan about Romero's sacrifice, how he had donated his own blood during the surgery, risking his own life to save his son. Tears began to stream down Ivan's face as Jaime explained that his father was in a coma, having lost too much blood during the procedure. "He's in the next room, still unconscious. But would you like to see him?" Jaime's voice broke. Ivan nodded, still trying to grasp the immense sacrifice his father had made for him. Minutes later, supported by Jaime, Ivan stumbled into the next room. The sight of Romero, pale and still in the hospital bed, hooked up to tubes and monitors, made Ivan's heart clench. He moved slowly toward the bed, his legs trembling not just from physical weakness, but from an overwhelming wave of emotion. "Papa," Ivan began, his voice barely a whisper. And then, as if a dam had broken, the words began to pour out, filled with love, gratitude, and a desperate plea. "Papa, it's me, Ivan. I don't even know where to begin. Dr. Jaime told me what you did for me, how you literally gave your blood to save me. Papa, I could never thank you enough. But now I need you to live, to be strong, and live. Do you remember when I was 6 and you took me fishing for the first time? I was so excited, but when we got to the lake, I tripped and fell in. I was so scared, but you jumped in after me without hesitation. You held me tight and told me you'd never let me drown. Well, now I'm the one who won't let you drown, Papa. And that time at my first baseball game, I was so nervous, but you were there, cheering me on from the stands. You always said it didn't matter if I hit the ball or not. What mattered was that I tried with all my heart. Well, Papa, now I need you to try with all your heart. Try to come back to me. I remember all those nights when you'd come home late from the hospital, exhausted from saving lives, but you'd still find the energy to help me with my homework. You always said knowledge was the greatest gift you could give me, but you were wrong, Papa. The greatest gift you ever gave me was your unconditional love. Papa, there's so much I still need to learn from you. So much I want to tell you. So many moments I want to share. Remember how you always said, you wanted to see me graduate from college? You wanted to dance at my wedding? You wanted to hold your grandchildren in your arms? Papa, all of that is still to come, and I need you to be there for every single one of those moments. You've always been my hero, Papa, not just for the brilliant doctor you are, but for the incredible man you are. Your compassion, your strength, your determination. You taught me so much just by your example. And now, once again, you've shown me just how far your love for me reaches. Papa, please open your eyes. Please squeeze my hand. Give me a sign. Any sign that you can hear me. We still have so many laughs to share, so many arguments to have, so many hugs to exchange. I love you, Papa, more than words can say. You're my rock, my safe harbor, my best friend. I'm not ready to say goodbye. I don't think I'll ever be. So please, and come back to me. Come back to us. There's so much we still have to do together. So many memories to make. So many moments to share. Papa, you gave me life twice now. First when I was born, and now by saving me on that operating table. Let me return the favor. Let me be your strength now. Let me be the reason you fight to come back. Because I need you, Papa. I've always needed you, and I'll always need you. You're a part of me, the best part. So please come back to me. Ivan's last words were almost inaudible. his voice choked with tears, which now streamed freely down his face. He took his father's hand in his, praying silently for a miracle, for a sign, for anything that would indicate his words had been heard. The days dragged on like an eternity for Ivan, who rarely left his father's bedside. The hospital room had become his entire world, the steady beep of the heart monitor his soundtrack. He watched every tiny movement, every fluctuation in Romero's vital signs, hoping desperately for a hint that his father was coming back to him. Nurses came and went, changing IV bags and checking vitals, casting sympathetic glances at the young man who refused to lose hope. "Papa, I'm here. I'm waiting for you. Please come back to me," Ivan whispered every night, holding Romero's cold hand. In response, only silence and the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the air. On the morning of the 5th day, as the light of the rising sun filtered through the blinds, Ivan noticed a subtle change. His father's fingers, which had been immobile in his hand, seemed to twitch slightly. He leaned forward, his heart racing, barely daring to breathe. Slowly, agonizingly, slowly, Romero's fingers began to tremble. "Papa! Papa, can you hear me?" Ivan called out, his voice trembling with emotion. Romero moaned softly, his eyes struggling to open against the light. Ivan frantically pressed the nurse call button, his eyes fixed on his father's face. Romero's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, before finally settling on his son's face. For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other, tears welling up in both their eyes. "Ivan, you're okay?" Romero managed to whisper, his voice raspy from disuse. Ivan let out a choked laugh, tears now flowing freely down his face. "Yes, Papa. Thanks to you, I'm okay. We're both okay." He smiled through his tears. Before Romero could reply, the door flew open and Dr. Jaime rushed in, accompanied by a team of nurses. His eyes widened at the sight of Romero conscious, a relieved smile spreading across his tired face. "Romero, welcome back, my friend. You gave us quite a scare," Jaime exclaimed, hurrying to the bedside. Romero tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. A nurse quickly offered him a glass of water with a straw. After a few careful sips, he finally managed to speak more clearly. "Jaime, Mrs. Isabel, the other patients, what happened?" He looked at the director, his brow furrowed with worry. Jaime, placing a reassuring hand on Romero's shoulder, smiled. "Everyone's okay, Romero. Thanks to you, they all survived. Mrs. Isabel is recovering quickly and should be discharged soon. As for the other patients in the hospital, well, they're all fine. Right after you passed out, the power came back on, and the evacuation wasn't necessary. Besides, your quick thinking in ordering more blood, it saved your own life. If you hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had any way to replenish the blood you so selflessly donated to your son," Jaime explained, his voice filled with pride and admiration. Romero frowned, confused. "I ordered more blood?" Jaime nodded, his smile widening. "Yes. You don't remember? In the middle of the surgery, you asked the nurse to request more blood from the nearest bank. It was that blood that ended up saving your life after you collapsed." Tears welled up in Romero's eyes as the reality of what had happened truly sunk in. He looked at Ivan, who was still holding his hand tightly, and then back at Jaime. I actually did all that," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Ivan squeezed his father's hand. "Yes, Papa. You're a hero. To me, to Mrs. Isabel, to everyone in the hospital." Jaime nodded solemnly. "Romero, what you did was beyond heroic. You risked your own life to save your son and your patients." Romero closed his eyes for a moment, letting Jaime's words and the love in his voice wash over him. When he opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. I just did what any father, any doctor would do. But I'm grateful, so grateful to be here, to see my son, to know that everyone is okay." His voice was soft. Ivan leaned down and hugged his father carefully, mindful of the tubes and wires. "Thank you, Papa, for everything. I love you so much. I don't know what I would do without you," he whispered. In that moment, as father and son embraced, with Jaime looking on with a tearful smile, the hospital room seemed to radiate with the warmth of love, gratitude, and renewed hope. The storm had passed, both literally and figuratively. And though the road to full recovery would still be long, they knew they would face it together, stronger for having overcome the impossible. "So when can I go back to work?" Romero asked, a familiar twinkle of humor returning to his eyes. His question sparked surprised laughter from Yvonne and Jaime. "One thing at a time, Romero. For now, focus on recovering. The hospital can wait," Jaime replied, shaking his head in fond exasperation. And so, surrounded by his son's love and the respect of his colleagues, Romero began his road to recovery. The path ahead would be long, but he knew that with Yvonne by his side and the memory of what they had accomplished together, he could face whatever challenges came his way. The future, once uncertain, now gleamed with promise and happy possibilities. 6 months later, Dr. Romero walked through the hospital corridors, now as the new chief of cardiothoracic surgery, a promotion he received after his recovery. He stopped at the nurse's station to review some charts when he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, Papa, came to see you before my anatomy class." Yvonne approached, carrying a backpack. Romero, hugging his son, smiled, surprised by the visit. "It's good to see you, son. How are the studies going? Intense?" "Intense, but I'm enjoying every minute of it. That experience, well, it made me sure I want to follow in your footsteps. I decided I'll specialize in cardiology, just like you." Yvonne's eyes shone with excitement. Romero could barely contain his pride as he looked at his son. "I'm sure you'll be an excellent doctor, son, regardless of what specialty you choose," he answered with a proud smile. As they were talking, Mrs. Isabel appeared in the hallway, accompanied by a nurse. Seeing Romero, her face lit up. "Dr. Romero, it's so good to see you. I'm here for my routine checkup." Romero greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Isabel, it's a pleasure to see you. How are you feeling?" "Wonderfully well, thanks to you. You know, last month I got to see my first grandchild born. I wouldn't have had that moment if it weren't for you," she replied, her eyes filled with grateful tears. Romero felt a lump forming in his throat. "I'm so happy for you, Mrs. Isabel. It's for moments like that that I do what I do." He was delighted to see her so healthy and strong. At that moment, Dr. Jaime joined the group. "Romero, your cardiology team is waiting for you for a meeting. You requested my presence?" "Ah, hello, Yvonne, Mrs. Isabel." After exchanging greetings, Romero turned back to Yvonne and Mrs. Isabel. "Yes, I'm coming right away. Please excuse me, I have to go. Yvonne, see you at home for dinner. Mrs. Isabel, good luck with your exams." As he walked away with Jaime, Romero reflected on how much his life had changed. His new position brought more responsibilities, but also more opportunities to make a difference. "You know, Jaime, sometimes I still can't believe everything that happened," he confessed quietly. Jaime smiled, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You deserve it, Romero. Your dedication to every patient." Romero nodded, grateful, as he entered the meeting room. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same courage and compassion that had brought him this far. With his son following in his footsteps, grateful patients like Mrs. Isabel, and the support of colleagues like Jaime, the future seemed bright and filled with happy possibilities. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing you exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next amazing narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We thank you so much for being here with us. Now you can click on the links appearing on your screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, packed with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.